Hey sewing friend, I thought I would do a quick before we get started video before we get started because we're going to be doing a lot of projects over the next week. I have so much fun planned, but I want to make sure that you get the absolute most out of it, and so I wanted to go over some basic tools, which is going to start with our sewing machine. Our sewing machine is the most important tool that we have when making these projects because it's really what's doing the stitching for us. So if you're not familiar with your sewing machine, we're going to go ahead and go through the sewing machine so that you have a handle on this before we get started on any other projects. You ready? So this is our sewing machine, and your sewing machine might look a little different than this, and that's totally fine. Likely over on this side somewhere there's going to be a switch, and that's going to turn on your machine. You'll generally know your machine is turned on because the light will come on, and that's usually the best indication to know that your machine is on. Now sometimes the light might burn out depending on if you have an older machine, and then your light might not come on, but your machine would still be on. Over here we have our flywheel. It's our wheel that turns, and you can turn this back and forth and you'll see that your needle goes up and down as you turn. Whenever you finish a project, when you end stitching, before you pull your thread or your project away from underneath the needle, you want to have your needle all the way in the up position. And you know it's as far up in the up position as it can be when this guy, which might be more or less exposed on your machine, is all the way up. You want this is the thread take up lever, to be all the way up high when you finish. And the reason for that is because you want that thread take up lever to be all the way up when you start. So if you finish that way, when you bring your next project under the sewing machine, you'll be starting that way. If you start with your thread take up lever down here, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to bring that thread take up lever up, and when it does that, whoop, it will unthread your needle almost every time. And it's the most frustrating thing to constantly have your needle unthreaded. Trust me. So if you always make sure that your thread take up lever is up, then you'll always know that your needle won't get unthreaded when you start a project. Easy enough. So I'm going to show you how to thread a basic machine. Most sewing machine manuals are online nowadays, so you will want to go online to find your sewing machine manual and see if there's any specific instructions on yours. This machine, this is a Baby Lock Jubilant, and it actually has great instructions right here for how to thread your machine. So I'm going to go ahead and put my thread on the spindle, and then I'm going to add this cap, which helps keep it in place. I've got a number 1 here. Now look, there are 2 number 1s, and there are 2 number 2s, and then things get crazy with 2 number 3, like wait, so okay, I'm doing 2 number 2s, and there's a 3 here and a 3 down here. This 3 here, because you'll see that these are in circles, this is if I'm going to thread my bobbin or rewind my bobbin. So I'm not winding my bobbin right now, I'm just threading my machine. So I'm going to go through here, and every machine will have you go all the way down, all the way back up, and all the way down again. Now this first all the way down is where your thread is going to go between 2 tension discs. So right here, almost like imagine 2 cymbals that kind of like clip over the thread to keep the tension and then open up. So those are like our little cymbals, our tension discs are on this first down, and then we go up, and this is our thread take up lever, and then we're going to go down again. Now there'll be a little hook down here, and then you can thread your machine. Now, almost every machine, they're older, they're called so there are older machines that will thread from the side, but almost every machine will have your needle thread from the front, so you'll be able to see your hole and put your thread right through the needle. This one has an automatic needle threader, which is fabulous. So with a push of a button, I've got my needle threaded. You'll want to check the manual on your sewing machine to see how that works. Okay, so now we have our bobbin, and there are 2 general different kinds of bobbins that you can have. This one is a drop-in bobbin, and I love this because it's clear, so I can see how much bobbin thread I have, because running out of bobbin thread is the worst. I can open this up, and I can pull out the bobbin. Now the way that you put your bobbin in the bobbin housing is absolutely going to matter. It's super important. So important that they actually put a picture right here on the machine. I need to have the thread coming out this way. And then I can go around, and there's a nice little channel for me, and it even has a blade. So this bobbin is super easy. This is a drop-in bobbin. You might have a machine where the bobbin goes in from the front. There is a special way that you have to put your thread in one of those as well. Make sure that you check your sewing machine manual, because if you're having problems, you may have the thread, the bobbin flipped, so the thread is coming off the bobbin in the wrong direction. Clockwise or counterclockwise, it can totally make a difference when your machine is running. Now this machine has a couple other things. You may notice that I named this machine Saturday. I have another machine named Sunday, and that's how I can get away with saying that I only sew on Saturday and Sunday, because this is my Saturday and I have Sunday on the other side of my room, and I sew with her pretty often as well. This is a computerized machine. It just means it has a screen. This screen is a bit bigger than like a calculator screen, a fancy calculator, and it gives you all kinds of information. This big 3 right here tells me which stitch number I'm on, and then there's something that gives me the stitch length and the stitch width. We're really not going to play with stitch length or stitch width in these lessons, but you totally can if you want on other projects. Here it gives images showing all the different fancy stitches that you can do. This one includes buttonholes. These are always fun to play with, so I encourage you at the end of this course to go back and start playing with some of your fancy stitches, because it's just one of those fun things about sewing. Here on my machine I have these, like, it's a play button and then a double play button and a triple play button, and that's how fast my sewing machine will go when I press all the way down on the pedal. So when you're just starting, you might want to put it over to the slower, and when you're feeling super experienced, you might want to put it a little higher. This button right here makes your needle go up or down. It's the needle up, needle down button. You can do the same thing with the flywheel over here as well. This button here will actually tie a knot at the end of my project. I don't usually use this button. I didn't grow up with a machine that had this button, but it might be something that you want to do at the beginning or ending of your projects to tie a knot to secure your threads. This is the backstitch button. When you press this button while you have your sewing machine going, it will reverse stitch, and then once you depress the button, it'll stitch forward again. This here is super cool. If you remove your presser foot, you can actually use the start stop button, and you can sew without the presser foot at all. So that's kind of handy. I also want to point out this fun feature. Most machines here on this side will have a cutting blade, and I use this often throughout the videos. It's way handier than trying to find my scissors in my mess on my desk. I can just cut my threads right here. One last thing I want to show you is the foot pedal, and this goes on the floor, and when you press down on the foot pedal with your foot, it'll make the machine go. When you lift up, it'll make this machine slow down. It would be a lot like driving a car, you know, if you're old enough to drive a car. Now you'll notice that I'm pressing on the foot pedal and it's not doing anything with the sewing machine. What's up with that? The reason is because I don't have the presser foot down. And right here on the back of the machine is the presser foot lever. So this is how I can go up and down with the presser foot. Depending on your sewing machine, it may not beep at you if your presser foot isn't down. Some fancier sewing machines will actually say, oh, you want to start sewing? I'll go ahead and put the presser foot down for you, and it'll put the presser foot down for you. And some less fancy sewing machines will not even know where the presser foot is, and it'll assume that you know what you're doing, and it'll sew without that presser foot down, which will end up with a horrible mess, and it's very nasty. So make sure that you put that presser foot down before you start sewing. Now one last thing I want to show you, because I don't talk about it in any of the videos, but it can totally come in handy, is how to use a seam ripper. Now this is a super tiny seam ripper, but it'll get the job done. There are all kinds of beautiful seam rippers with fancy handles if you want, but basically it just has a hook and a ball like this. So you can just put the hook into your stitches, and down at the bottom of this hook is actually a little sharp spot, and that little sharp spot is what will cut your threads. So every couple threads you just put it in to the loop, and that'll just pull right out. and that way you can rip your seams. Now another way that you can rip your seams, especially in an area where you've gone back and forth like I have right here, is that you can open up your seam like this, tuck in your seam ripper, and rip. So you open up your seam and cut those threads. And you just want to be careful that you're only cutting the threads that you used for sewing, that you're not cutting your fabric or ripping a hole in your fabric at all. Because the whole point of ripping out a seam is so that you can remake this project and re-put that seam in using the exact same fabric. Now here I've gotten to the spot where I've gone back and forth, so there's a lot more stitches, and I'll only be able to advance this a little bit before I rip some stitches and advance it a little bit. But pretty easily. Almost to the end. Don't be impatient and just try to rip it apart. You want to make sure that you're using the blade to cut those threads. There we go. So now all you have to do is go along here and just pull out all these little thread bits that got cut and throw those in the garbage. If you want, you can use a little bit of a steam iron, and that'll help kind of hide all these holes that were made by your stitching, and you can go ahead and reuse this fabric for your project or for a different project. So there you go, some quick basic sewing tips for your sewing machine and for ripping stitches out that hopefully will help make the projects a little bit easier as we get started. I can't wait to see you then. Thanks so much for watching.